So today we have Jonathan Lewis. He is in the North Carolina East District. And we have Karl Eastlack. He's in the Northeast District. And then we have Mike Hilson. He's in the Chesapeake District. So we're so happy to have you all here. Thank you so much for joining us. As usual, you know, our conversations are about awareness, but mainly, you know, growth, but ultimately, unity in Christ. So we welcome all of you. We're going to probably have a few more joining us, but why don't we start with Pastor Jonathan Lewis. Can you share a little bit with us about your context, about what you do, a little bit about your district, so we know? You're muted. You're muted.
Thank you, Josemar, for giving me the opportunity to be a part of this. I've been able to duck in on some of the meetings along the way, and it's really been interesting to see the discussion that is taking place. And I'm thankful that we're having this discussion within the Wesleyan Church, because I think it's something that is close to God's heart for His church. As you said, I'm in North Carolina, and but my life has kind of been a multi-ethnic kind of life, and my wife is from Puerto Rico, and so that's kind of immediately integrated me into a whole different culture and language and an atmosphere throughout our marriage together. But really, you know, a lot of my life has been spent just kind of having a desire to mix in that kind of cultural kind of mixture of people and language and food and all of those things that make that special. When I was probably one of the most interesting aspects of just who I am was when I became the pastor of the church in Greensboro, where I served prior to becoming the DS, where I got to kind of lead a church that I had always wanted to pastor. And that was a multi-ethnic church. It was not that way when I arrived, but by the time, after 11 years of becoming a part of the community and part of the atmosphere, and just allowing, you know, what I felt like God had uniquely gifted me to do and how to lead had kind of impacted that entire ministry to the point where we had become what I would say a multi-ethnic church, and began to have kind of witness within the community that allowed people to see the beauty of that. And so that's been a part of how I've tried to lead our churches here across our district. And there's so much diversity that exists within our state. I did a tour of the state when I first became the DS, and just made a kind of big circle around throughout the district, and stopped at it. And over the course of 3 days, stopped at about 8 different churches, and told people I heard 5 different Southern accents along the way. And it just shows that even within our own, you know, what we call our mono-ethnic kind of reflection, there's still a lot of diversity that is present even within what we call who we are, us, the majority culture. And so when you dig down deep and begin to understand people, their uniqueness, and what they bring to the mixture, you begin to see that even within that, there's differences in culture and differences of perspectives. And I just believe that when we're operating at our fullest and best, we're valuing all of those things that God brings to the table when He puts us all together as the body of Christ, children of God.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. How many churches are in your district?
There are 90 churches.
90?
Yeah.
Okay. Wow, that's a lot. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing. I love the fact that your wife is Puerto Rican, because it brings another layer, you know, flavor and everything different, you know, to your district, of course, to your marriage, the way that you pastor and all of that. So thank you so much, Pastor Jonathan.
A little sofrito makes all the difference, right?
Yes, I know. That's so good. Pastor Karl Eastlack, would you mind sharing with us? You're muted. There you go.
There we go.
Yeah.
Hi there, Josmar. Thank you for the invitation to be a part of your last session of this cohort. And I'm sure you've all gotten to know each other a little bit over time, and especially as you've gotten to know Josmar and her heart in all of this. I know Josmar, and I'm so glad she's leading this, and I'm grateful today to be a part of this. I am the district superintendent for the Northeast District in the Wesleyan Church. We have 8 states that we cover as a district team here, 118 churches that make up our district. We have 3 very large cities in our district that really impact the flavoring of our district. Philadelphia, New York City, and Boston all are within the geographic boundaries of our district. And so because of that, primarily because of that, our district is 38% ethnically non-white in the majority of the 38% of the church is the majority non-white. And I'm excited about that. That gives me an opportunity to test drive some of my own passions and my own heart in seeing the Wesleyan Church as it is in heaven. And I love that slogan that you have, Josmar, for this particular cohort. I was a pastor for 28 years in the Wesleyan Church. The most recent was in Buffalo, just outside of Buffalo, New York, at Eastern Hills Wesleyan Church. Was there for 22 years, oversaw basically a church plant, and that grew and had county-wide and then region-wide influence for the kingdom's sake. Left there, went to World Hope International, became president of World Hope International following Joanne Lyon. And with that just expanded my understanding of the many, many issues surrounding being multi-ethnic and, of course, multicultural, and traveling around the world and the many places that World Hope operates, gave me, just expanded my heart and my mind and my understanding and my desires to see the Wesleyan Church be like that. And so when I became district superintendent in 2012, I just brought all that package with me, including even in my teen years when I was a teenager. My best friend from the age of 13 on, my best friend was a gentleman in Casper Farrow. As some of you know him. He was a Wesleyan pastor. He passed away just 2 or 3 years ago. He was my best friend in high school. We roommated with each other in college. We were best men at each of our weddings. And he's just this wonderful, gifted, and happy African-American gentleman that influenced me, that showed me a different culture, a different way as I got to know his family. And then Anita and I, even as we got married, the Lord opened doors for us to be able to adopt a beautiful little baby who is a Haitian background. And that just, again, I remember the judge ordering us, I'm going to only approve this if you continue to expose this beautiful little 5-month-old baby to her culture. And so we worked hard over the years to do that in Rachel's life. She's 28 years old now, and we've been given that wonderful gift to be able to learn and to expand our own hearts. So I just love being a part of this conversation. I'm looking forward to how things go today and what I hear from my 2 brothers that are walking with me in this.
Thank you so much, Pastor Karl. Something that I have enjoyed really much from all the panelists is that their experiences and the way that God has put you on each path definitely has impacted in a great way your leadership. So it's not by any by coincidence at all that your walk of life has been, the way it has been. So thank you so much. We're going to dig deeper in some questions. Pastor Mike Hilson, welcome. Can you share with us today?
Absolutely. Well, hey, not to be outdone by the other 2, my wife is half Korean, and so we can get together and have a cook-off and do all the food. And by the way, my wife is half Korean. My oldest son's wife is half Vietnamese, and my youngest son's wife is Filipino. So something's going on in Eastern world for us. I'm not sure what's up with that, but at any rate, pastored for Tina and I started our ministry in the other North Carolina district, North Carolina West, and pastored there for about 8.5 years, and then moved here to Maryland, where we pastor New Life Church, or New Life Network of churches now. And we've been here for January will be 23 years. And So New Life Network of Churches is, well, New Life Church in La Plata, the central congregation, is a church that's about 40%, 45% African-American, 45% of Caucasian. And then the remaining percentage is just a smattering of everything you can imagine, with a heavy dose of Filipino inside of our church. And because there's a large Filipino community just up the road from us here. We also have other churches. We have video venues, and we have church plants, all of which are highly diverse. Well, let me say most of which are highly diverse. A couple are in smaller communities that are not, but most of which are highly diverse. We have one congregation that on any given Sunday, you can have 20 home languages spoken inside of this congregation of about 200 people. But that speaks to the area in which we live here in the greater Washington, D.C. area. So we, let's see, what else I need to say? The Chesapeake District we're the smallest of the 3 districts you're talking to today. We have probably about 54 churches in the district. The network, New Life Network, that I still pastor is a network of about 13 churches. So put all that together, you're at about 67 churches total. And yes, I do both. I'm part-time as the district superintendent with a team of people that help me lead that. And then my main gig is here at La Plata, leading the New Life Network of Churches.
You have your hands full, Pastor Mike, because you're a pastor and a DS. You know,
I just bore easily. That's all there is to it. So
I can see that. Or you're an overachiever, which I can also see. You know, but yeah, I've also seen the normal. The other language that we speak here in this cohort is the language of food. And so a lot of examples have come from that. So thank you for sharing. But so you were invited here to cover a lot of ground, because we have had 6 weeks where we talk just specifically of one prompt. But with you, we're going to share a lot of it, because we want to hear from all you have to do. But so this document, the Wesleyan Church as It Is in Heaven, it says that this resource serves to measure progress in the area of multi-ethnic diversity. So in your, you are district superintendent. So how do you measure progress in this area? Anyone can go.
That's one thing that when you begin to measure this kind of effectiveness, it changes all the metrics, and it changes the way you determine effectiveness or even determine church growth. Oftentimes, even as I pastored, I can honestly say that there were times when I felt like I was growing the church backwards, because I felt like there were times when people would leave, and yet we were still more integrated and connected within the community than ever before. And so it takes a period of time where part of that multi-ethnic kind of church journey and what makes it effective is kind of taking a perspective on how well you are connecting with, being able to make inroads to, and being able to understand the heart of the community, as much as counting how many people happen to be in the seats. And so there's a kind of a dual perspective you carry with you in that journey.
Thank you so much.
For me, the way I tend to measure this is the same way in the district. Is I try to look at the district the same way I do as the church, which is we do what we call quiet demographic counts at New Life once in a while, just to give us a marker of where we are, because sheer numbers tell you something about where you are. Inside the district, I find that more difficult, because just giving sheer numbers of multi-ethnic congregations doesn't tell you how multi-ethnic the individual congregation is. And so you could have a large percentage inside the district that are non-white, but they may be all one ethnic group when they gather inside their church. And so it makes it a little more difficult. And we don't really have a measurement inside of the district for that, though I probably should develop one. But we don't have a measurement for that. Inside New Life, I want a breakdown of each individual congregation and what is their, are they multi-ethnic or not? So that's what I'm looking for.
Karl?
Yeah. So, I mean, one way to do all of this is to put down some metrics and some goals and statistical analyses and things like that. And then when we hit them, I feel very pleased. You know, I look at that. Our district hit these certain markers. But if hitting those particular statistical markers don't translate into the experience that the people are feeling and being a part of, then we've just done a pat on the back from the majority white, if you will, or at the organizational structure level. And so one of the things that we've begun to look at more so is, what are our people saying about the district? How are they feeling about our district? And it was probably 4 years, maybe into my tenure as district superintendent. Anita and I were actually co-district superintending at the time, when a group of ethnically non-white pastors and district delegates came up to me to compliment on the experience of that year's district conference. We had just finished it. And for a few years prior to that, the pastors' gatherings, we have an annual church health conference called Excel, things like that, leading up to the moment when they came up to me and said, "Thank you, Dr. Karl and Dr. Anita." They said, "We, for the first time, don't feel like we're cousins, but we feel like we're actually part of the brotherhood and the sisterhood here of the district." And that reflected back to me when I was a little boy in the Eastlack family. And we had 3 older brothers, and then there was my sister and I. And doggone it, for most of my growing up years, at Thanksgiving, Bonnie and I were stuck at what was called the kids' table. And I it was okay at first when I didn't know, but all of a sudden I started realizing, hey, wait a minute, I'm not even part of conversations that are happening and decisions that are being made. I'm stuck at another little table. And it was just wonderful to hear that because of the way that the district had been implementing some of our philosophic approach to a complete inclusiveness at all levels of district operations, that they began to feel like there was a sense of ownership that they had around decisions rather than sitting at the kids' table. And so that's how we've begun to measure. And over the last many years now, we've measured listening to what people are saying about their experience, because I think that's the best gauge of how we're doing with our multi-ethnic and diverse operations in the district.
Yeah, thank you for that. It's I do remember that quote that you share about being brothers and sisters instead of cousins, because it does have an impact. I actually shared that quote of yours in here in weeks before, because that made such an impact for me. Like, I love my cousins, but it's not the same as my brothers. You know, it's like, I love you, but it's different. So it does play a good trick in my head. So thank you. And somebody else said that sometimes it's different when you invite people to the kitchen to cook than just to the table. It definitely also says something different from you. But Pastor Jonathan, so you said that within, I don't remember how you worded it, but you went and found several accents because you have just one, you know, just it's North Carolina East Wesleyan district. So in your district, how are you we're talking about prompt number 1 on population. How are you increasing the numbers of people from diverse ethnic backgrounds and cultural populations in your district, in your churches?
Well, definitely in just about every church, if they were to draw a 3 to 5 mile circle around the church, they would find that the demographics reflect a tremendous sense of diversity. And so one of the things that we've often talked about is reflecting our community. And the reality is that if we just talked about becoming a diverse congregation, if you could get out in some of the rural areas, some of the pushback that pastors might have is, look, they say, well, we're just not diverse. For some areas, that's actually true. However, if you really dive down into that, start looking at the people that surround you, you don't have to walk very far around your church to begin to realize that there's tremendous diversity exists around you. And you don't necessarily have to be an urban church to be able to find that. And so really trying to help churches change the way we talk about it, and we talk about reflecting our community and being able to reflect the people that surrounds us. And so that's been one of the initial things that we began to talk about. But also, we represent half of the state, but that doesn't, and 90 churches sounds like a lot, but the reality is there are a lot of gaps in the eastern part of our state where we do not have a presence. And so in this last year, I've tried to help our pastors begin to pray with me to really set our targets on specific locations that will not only help us close in the gaps of where those churches are located, but those places are also very racially diverse as well, and reflect some of the places where people would rather skip over that town. Let's go to the next town. And but that's the place where we need to be. We need to be in the heart of that place, that town. And it may not be the highest in terms of the income and where everybody is gravitating to, but that city, that town needs Jesus. And so places that people would know in our area, like Rocky Mountain, Kinston, and Lumberton, those are the places those are the flyby, the drive-by kind of locations. But I think we need to begin to pray that we could have a voice and a transforming presence there.
Yeah, that reminds me of a song of, like, I didn't have a clue before what was the flyover states. Like, nobody looks at that. I live in one of those states, so I understand now. Everybody wants to go to DC, LA, the beach, so it's great. But just that gap, they also need Jesus, just reflecting that and letting the pastors know. So sometimes it's not probably even the communities that more people want to be in, but they also need Jesus. So how are we bridging that? So thank you so much. Pastor Karl, you you said, let's see here, 119 churches, 8 states. You have New York City, Pennsylvania, and Boston. So those are big cities. So in terms of that population, and I'm going to talk to you about prompt number 2, which is participation. How is your district regularly creating pathways or events or resources that demonstrate multicultural expressions and engagement?
So I tend to work at a philosophic level and then operate out of these philosophy or these boundaries or these guardrails, if you will, that I have that influence how I lead across the district. And one of the guardrails that I have is the guardrail of example, of leading by example, because it's easy for me to pontificate or tell somebody how they should in their context do this or that. But for me, I would rather just quietly show them how it's done and let them live in it enough when they experience district events and things like that, that when they go back, that it prompts them to think about what does it mean. And I love the prompts that you've been using. Those are very valuable in our churches, and we encourage our pastors to use those. But so to give an example, at all of our district events, we work very hard at making sure that the platform is fully integrated. It's so easy to go to a default, whoever the leader is, whatever skin color, whatever ethnic orientation of that leader. It's so easy to go to the default. Or when I have my Zoom gatherings for our pastors, and we do those very regularly, it's very easy for me when I call on somebody to open in prayer the eyes just naturally go to a skin color that it's your comfort food, or it's just the default that you, or the gender even. We're not even talking about that today, but even the particular gender. And that I make sure that I'm intentional about spreading the love, if you will, spreading out the responsibility, as you said, Joe Smart, when you talked about inviting people to come in and cook with you in the kitchen, maybe add their own ingredient. And so when I call on one of our Hispanic pastors to open us up in prayer, and I know that his primary language is Spanish, I'll say, then why don't you pray in Spanish, and we'll agree with you with amen. And it's beautiful. It's a beautiful thing. But it takes real intentionality, because we tend to go to our default. So I think that's one thing that I do. And I think that the second thing across the district that I do, I realize that as DS and Mike and Jonathan know this too, we're actually the gatekeepers in the denomination, more so than even people who work at our international headquarters or things like that. We're the kind of denominational gatekeepers. We have a lot of say in the kind of pastors that we want to have in our district, and all of these kind of things. And so with that in mind, I take very seriously the intentionality of looking out of the box and not just going to the default choices. And so in creating a district approach, I'm hoping that the experience that when they experience that they realize this is a very good thing to look a little bit more like heaven. It's a very good thing. And so that's some of what we do in our churches.
Intentionality takes a lot of effort, for sure.
It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work.
Yeah, you have to think extra. You have to look deeper. You have to, sometimes make extra calls, not just the emails, because emails are good, but sometimes the personal touch, of a call or something really plays a lot. So thank you for that. Pastor Mike Hilson, I have a question for you about Purposeful Narrative. So because you said that you have 54 churches and your network has 13 churches, you have also, you're in Maryland, and on the greater DC area, that's a lot of different ethnicities and, people from everywhere there. So how is your district including and celebrating stories of people from diverse ethnic backgrounds? So
I think I think intentionality, as Karl says, intentionality is the issue. If you, whatever you are doing, you've got to be intentional about showing more than one given background. In the DC area, we've got everything you can imagine here. Everybody does, but intensely, say, with the church we have in Alexandria, where you can have 20 different, birth languages spoken in one congregation of about 200 people. So there's all this diversity that exists, but you've got to make sure it shows up in your programming. So not just on the platform, we work very hard, just as Karl does on the platform. We would also work very hard at doing this in any video that we would produce. In New Life Network, for instance, we do a lot of video work, because especially now with COVID, since everything is video, we are all homeschoolers and televangelists. Who knew? But anyway, so we do a lot of video work. We're very intentional about saying that video work needs to be as diverse as it can possibly be. And you need to work at that. You need to find the right people. So finding the story of someone who is of a different or varying ethnic background is going to be important, because in the Holy Spirit, there is no difference between one group or another. And so what you present to them must be as diverse as you want the district or the church to be, or else you're not going to get that diversity long term. Secondly, I would say you have to be very, very careful to not simply put diversity out front as a part of your outer show. You must also have it as a part of your inner workings. So for instance, we're very cautious. We're very intentional about our district board of administration. We're very intentional about our local board of administration. We try to be as intentional as we possibly can. It's not always the easiest thing to do, but we've got to find ways to do it. So we've got to be intentional about all those things and constantly talk about those stories. We'll say one other thing to kind of speak to where Karl was and to where Jonathan was earlier. We've coined a phrase in the New Life Network recently, which is called the diversification of the dinner table. And what we're after is not a measurable programmatic thing inside of the church. And I may press this through the district as well going forward. But what we're after is you need to be spending some of your downtime with people that are not from the same background as you, not just at church, not just at work, but your downtime. For instance, and here's the story I always tell. Tina and I run around with a group that we call the Six Pack, not because of what we drink, but because there's 6 of us. Stay with me. But it's called the Six Pack. And the Six Pack is me and Tina. So Tina's half Korean. And then there's Mike and Elsie. Mike is African-American and Elsie is Puerto Rican. And then there's Dennis and Lisa, who are Filipino. So we get together and we just hang out. We just talk. We just eat. We go out to eat together. We choose restaurants. And what happens is I get to know more about them. They get to know more about me. If we could multiply that in our pews as much as on our platforms, honestly, I'm going to say something. You'll get, Josmar, I'm going to apologize before I say this. I am no longer convinced that the answer to our societal problem or this problem is the diversification of the debate stage, because the debate stage is no longer a matter of debate. It's a matter of who can scream their slogan the loudest. I am convinced that the answer to this problem is the diversification of the dinner table, where actual conversation takes place rather than whatever it is our public officials are doing because they're all jacked up. Just my thought. Sorry, didn't mean to go there. So
It's so good. Thank you so much. When you are on a dinner table, you pretty much, you're relaxed, with your 6-pack, Pastor Mike.
When you say it that way, it doesn't sound right. So.
I'm teasing you. No, but you're like just relaxed, and you pretty much have like,
Yes.
In terms of me being, a woman, it's like no makeup, no nothing, and then it's like you're just there.
Right.
And sometimes that takes so much effort because I have to let you in to see what probably out there, when I'm in a church, I'm like, oh yes, everything's great. But when you actually ask me, like, how are you really? Then I have to go, well, and so then I have to start letting you in. And sometimes people don't like that.
But it's there that the change is going to occur. And just think about it just a minute. At our dinner table, if we all cook, I got empanadas, I've got bulgogi, I'm gonna fry something as a Southern man. I've got lumpia. I've got all of that at the table, and we're just dude, it is awesome. But
I like lumpia, so thank you for bringing it up.
Very good. I think I got all the food groups in there. So.
Yeah, no, but it's really interesting. It reminds me of something that our GS, Wayne Schmidt, he says, you create trust over tension.
Right.
And that, to create trust, you talk to somebody else, but it also allows you, when you say something like, do you mean this or do you mean that? Because
you learn things too. Because I took the 3 guys, we all went out. We were going to go to a ACC tournament game. So we wanted to get barbecue, and I chose a barbecue spot, and I just chose it because I'm from North Carolina. I just chose a barbecue spot. We walk in, and it was like the birds stopped chirping, the wind stopped blowing, the angels in heaven went, and I was like, what happened? And I didn't think about the setting. I took my 2 friends in, and here I walk in with my African-American friend and my Filipino friend, and everybody in there is white. I never thought about that. I've always gone to this place. And I stood there for a few minutes and went, what is going on? And I think Mike's the one that said it to me. He said, why don't we find somewhere else to go? And I went, and so we left the restaurant, and I went, oh. And so I learned something in that moment. I learned that I've got to be careful about where we go. Unless we're just there to make a point, which we weren't. We were just there to have barbecue.
No, yeah, thank you. It has happened to me too, where it's like, oh my goodness. Yeah. And all I'm saying, it happens to me too, because, I'm from Venezuela. So it happens to all of us. But in terms of all of these prompts, when we think about it, some of this come easier and some of this is a little bit more work. So which one would you say you still have to or have been working on, whether for months, for years, you're now seeing some fruit? So which of these prompts, population, participation, power, purposeful narratives, practicing unity, or public square, have been the hardest for you to achieve in your districts? Karl.
I'll go first. Yeah. Looking at number 4, purposeful narrative. That sounds easy because, we talk. But I have found that those that are in the minority in any gathering, the particular ethnic group that's in the minority, including me as a white man when I'm visiting one of our Hispanic congregations, those in the minority tend to speak when asked to, rather than force our way into. There's so many hoops to jump through and barriers, and wonder if they're going to like what I say, or am I going to say the right thing, or is my language, am I going to embarrass myself by the struggling to find the right words or whatever that is. And so to feed back to the guardrail of intentionality, it takes leaders of understanding to invite people into the narrative and to get them up on the platform and have them tell their story, or have them stand where they are and share, or have them share a prayer request out loud, or things like that. There's so many inherent barriers to someone that's not in the majority of the room to speak and to pop their head up, because they're not really confident yet how they're going to be received. So that's and so you tend to go to the default. If you're telling stories as a pastor in your sermons, even the illustrations that you use, why not be colorful in the illustrations and practice your intentionality, even in how you talk and even in how you preach, and the stories that you tell about people in the church that you choose to tell a story about, that you were with somebody recently. I loved the stories with Mike, because that tells me that he's being intentional about the group he's hanging with, and the expression of the way that they are. And he's telling stories, and I can imagine that, and makes me say, I ought to be like that.
Yeah, last week we shared the learning tool of the cultural values debrief that we're going to dig deeper next week. And so in terms of this part where you're saying that some people are uncomfortable with the way that they speak, whatever, hello, it happens to me a lot. I am a trained translator. So of course, by any word that I will write wrong on the test, points were subtracted from me. So I have to be very careful when I say, oh, this, for example, this tastes good. Oh no, this tastes well or badly, or so I have to, in my head, I'm correcting myself, subtracting the points. I very seldom people do this to me, like personally, but it's something that I have to overcome that helps me understand other people too. And it helps me pretty much empowering them, because I can put myself in their shoes. But it is true, as you are being purposeful of helping them, because sometimes we don't see that. And because of the way that we are wired, sometimes even which one is the context? I don't want to just say it to you directly. I don't want to do this. So I'm like, well, yeah, maybe, so it just takes the relationship also to understand where I come from, for you to pretty much encourage me to keep going, and that we do need to hear your voice. That has been done to me by our director, Anita Eastlack. It's like, no, we're not correcting you. We want to learn from you, so please speak up. So it is helpful to have that push. So thank you for that, Pastor Karl. Pastor Jonathan or Mike?
Yeah, I was thinking, in reality, some of those things that we've talked about this, I kind of rely on, experience and all of those kind of things. But there's one thing that never the challenge is always the same, and it comes from the prompt that's practicing unity, and because that requires, what it talks in there is about advocacy, and where someone's got to be able to speak on behalf of this level of unity. We're not talking about just holding hands and singing a kumbaya and then going back to our spaces. We're talking about making this the norm and making this the expected in the days to come, part of our culture in the church. And it's going to take people who realize that someone's got to take a stand to speak on behalf of those that are left out of leadership. Because oftentimes people, when they look for leaders, they look for the easy leaders. When I'm walking through pastoral searches with churches, it always typically comes down to two choices. One will be the easy choice that will require no change whatsoever, and the other is a choice where they realize that if we go with this direction, there's a level of change that's going to come with it. This person's going to take us where we have never gone before. We're going to do things that we've never done before. And so it's a gut check kind of thing. And so, especially when you're talking about, issues of diversity and race, there are times when I've had to, present names, and I'm tempted to leave pictures and things like that out of the mix, because I know that if this picture goes with this name with the same qualifications, that person gets overlooked, because it will mean stretching. It will mean that they have to dig deep within themselves. But I've got to become the advocate to help them overcome that fear or that sense of whatever. And I help them understand, look, do you want the best pick, or do you want the safe pick? And so it's also heartbreaking, because I see the times when people take the risk, but I also see the times when people don't. And I've tried to present them with the opportunity that they have to do something that no other church in their area is doing, that allows them to see God's favor and blessing in new ways that they've never even imagined, because of their willingness to go where no one else has been willing to go. And and there's, for every element of excitement of pursuing this and understanding this is close to God's heart and I'm passionate about it, this is also part of the heartbreaking side of this, because I know that it doesn't necessarily need to be that way. And I've tried to have this conversation with churches that to help them understand that if all things were the same and this candidate looked more like me, there are a whole host of discussions and debates back and forth and all of these things. There are things that would not have to happen, but because this person is a person of color, or speaks with an accent, or is from another country, it throws a whole other pile of questions and issues and debating into the mix. And so I feel we have to, someone has got to speak up and help people understand. And that's what I love about that prompt, that it puts a real responsibility on us as leaders who have a passion for this, who understand the blessing that is involved in this, to be advocates, to speak out on behalf of this, and refuse to allow the status quo to always be the status quo.
Jonathan, this is Karl. I agree with you and wholeheartedly, and that also applies to women in ministry.
Exactly.
Once that's presented, it brings up people's upbringing and other churches that they came from, and all of these myriad issues. And for many women, it's an uphill. For most women, it's an uphill struggle just to get past their gender. So that applies there too. So thanks for speaking that. I appreciate that.
Thank you so much for that. I have had that idea too about the resumes with no names, no pictures, because if I hit the qualifications, why not, right? You should just look at what I'm able to do, but nothing else. I mean, the learning curve comes because of that. I think in a way, it's not just for the church that is going to be the curve. It's also for me to learn your church, to learn the way you do things. So thank you for that, Pastor Jonathan, and also Karl. Pastor Mike.
I think the two that I find most challenging are, let's see, I believe it's number 3, the power dynamic, and number 6, the public square. Let me go through these. The power dynamic, I'll give this to you, and perhaps from a different angle. Even when one is willing to empower or give power to a person from the non-majority group, the willingness to give that power is not always initially welcomed by the folks to whom the power has been given. For instance, I've had numerous people with tremendous skill sets whom we offered positions to. The first conversation we have to have every time is, okay, Mike, are you only offering me this because I'm not white? Or is this because I'm Black? Or is this because I'm Hispanic? Or is this because I every time I've never failed to not have that conversation. And I've had people to refuse positions of authority and refuse jobs simply because either they weren't convinced I was as sincere as I needed to be, and I did everything I could to say that I was, or they got onto my website, or they got onto the Wesleyan Church's website and didn't see much diversity there or enough diversity there. And so they decided to step back. There is a fear that what the white pastor is trying to do is simply trying to value message and not really trying to empower a given leader. And that fear has validity to it, but it makes it very difficult even when you desire to hand over authority, hand over power. It makes it difficult to do because there must be a grace and an understanding from both sides. And so I find that power dynamic to be difficult. I also will say, and this will lead me into the other group, in the other statement about the public square, we no longer live in a world where the church functions inside of its own little bubble or its own little greenhouse. So we now function in a world where the outside world invades the church every single Sunday. So every word we use as pastors is graded against whatever language or vocabulary or dictionary is being used by every listener's given news group choice. So if I use a phrase that MSNBC has decided is racist, I'm a racist. If I use a phrase that Fox News has decided is communist, I'm a communist. If I've used a phrase that CNN has decided is Republican, I'm a Republican. And it has nothing to do with anything other than, Kevin Myers said it well, we're all still using the same vocabulary. We're no longer all using the same dictionary. So the world has come into this conversation, but there are some dynamics in the world that walk into the church and make it harder for us in the church to do this as well, which brings me to public square. Inside of the public square, it is very difficult for the reasons I just enumerated for the church to take the proper role in moving forward. I'll give you a very real-time example. We came alongside during last year, during the riots and everything, we came alongside some folks in our church. We did a full day of conversation about racial disparity, about power structures, about all of these things inside of the church. And I made a couple of posts just to feed into that. I lost almost every police officer that attends our church. Not because they felt like I was being racially unfair, but because, and this is a quote, I no longer felt like I was welcome at the church because I'm the problem inside the conversation you're having. You see how that didn't work? That's not what I meant by any means, by any stretch. But that's how it was heard, because the external conversation is now internal to the congregation. And nuance is no longer a reality in American conversation. And because of that, the only way to fix that, this is why I'm leaning so heavily on diversification of the dinner table. Short conversations will not solve this problem. After a long 2-hour lunch with a police officer, he came back to the church. It just took 2 hours to say, hey, this is what I'm talking about. He said, okay, I get that. And he came back to the church. Well, that's the conversation that has to happen with the guy I'm trying to recruit who thinks I'm only hiring him because he's Black. That's a 2-hour lunch, or that's a 5-hour weekend at my house to finally say, oh yeah, you're really serious about this, aren't you? It takes much longer conversations in both the power dynamic and the public square dynamic today, because short conversations are not received with any nuance or grace. And therefore, we've got to have long, hard, kind, gracious, over the dinner table conversations, or we're not going to make progress at all. So I'm sorry. That was a long answer.
No, that's great. This is a journey of relationships, not tweets and social media, you know?
Yeah, for sure. It's not a 140 characters kind of conversation. It takes time, you know, and I love that, because it's getting to know your heart, you know, when you share with a person. But also I understand. So as you're talking, I'm like, oh yeah, I have also declined some conversations just because of this. Because it comes back to me to the resume. If you wouldn't have seen my name, if you would have known that I was born in Venezuela, would have still be here. Because then I understand what you're saying, but I'm just, I guess, saying, would I be invited in other things where it has nothing to do about multi-ethnic, but because what I bring in to the table, would I still be invited? Maybe not, maybe yes, you know? So I think I understand what you're saying. It's a normal push, like, hold on, let me understand what you're saying. But yes, it's definitely talking, letting me know, or the person that you're trying to reach, that this is not just because it makes me come back to the article. The title, "The Wesleyan Church of Cities in Heaven," serves as the why and clearly puts the priority as a spiritual, biblical, and discipleship issue versus a cultural motivation. You are not doing it because it's a cultural motivation. You're doing it because you see the kingdom of God and you see the kingdom first, and you want to include them, and this is why you're reaching out. So
Can I make one argument for leaving the pictures on the resumes? If I see a white guy wearing a Bill Cosby sweater with mall hair, I need to avoid them. So,
But
this goes back to your conversation. You have to have a conversation with that person.
I'm sorry.
Well,
No.
All I know is that, Josmar, if you're bringing arepas, you're welcome at any table that I'm at.
Noted. But yeah, so we have one question that I promised, and I told you I was going to ask, because we're talking about unity and, unifying. And so do we, oh no, sorry. Yeah, do we have anyone attempting to diversify the Black church, partnering or uniting it?
Well, in our network, we are working at diversifying the Black church, in the sense that every time we launch a church, and a number of our, especially our more recent launches, have been with people of color. But when we launch a church with someone that is non-white, we are constantly having the conversation with them that they need to be working at diversifying that church, because diversification of the church requires diversification of the church. And that's not just diversification of one type of church. Now, the place I would put a stopgap on that is first generation immigrant churches. We have a Korean church on the property here, and they want to hold church in Korean. They're not going to be diverse because not many people know Korean. It's easier to diversify a church that wanted to meet in Spanish, but even that's not going to be common. So first generation immigrant churches that want to meet and specifically hold together culture, that's a different thing, but that's also a different level of investment because they're not going to move to second generation. So you can't think 2 generations with them. I'm sorry, I don't mean to be quite as blunt as this, but first generation immigrant churches do not translate to second generation immigrant churches almost ever, although I'm sure it happens somewhere. But at any rate, other than that, we're looking for every church to be diverse when we plant it.
Yeah, that has been, and Karl and I have talked about it before, the biggest challenge with our Hispanic churches in terms of reaching that next generation. We've had one of our Hispanic churches that called me here recently to recruit for a youth pastor, but they intentionally said this can be an American couple. They would like to have a couple because they said all of our teens, they speak English. And so even if it's an American couple, we still want to value that because we want our teens are more important than just our language. And so we want to be able to reach them and embrace them. So, I mean, that was a major step, I think, for any of our Hispanic churches to welcome on their staff someone who's not even a native speaker. But in terms of bringing diversity to the Black church, that we don't have any majority African American churches. I have had friends within the African American church world here. I mean, we kind of refer to that, they themselves even refer, that's Black church world, and so that's when I think about that, that has a particular cultural relevance to it. That's been a challenge. It's been a tremendous challenge to bring about some sense of diversity within that church culture. That is something that is talked about even today as one of the greater challenges in this whole talk about multi-ethnic ministry.
That's what Karl.
Yeah. No, it's a struggle. I mean, so we have 3 congregations in our district that are primarily African American, and my wife just visited one yesterday, this past Sunday, representing the district, and it was a wonderful experience for her to be there. But it's in all 3 of our churches, there's a particular culture that lends itself to attracting a certain part of the cultural expression of African American. There's no doubt about that. And so it's been difficult. Santee Beatty, many of you know him. He and I have been going around on this for a few years now about the, it's as it is in heaven. So in heaven, it's going to happen automatically, no matter how I feel about it. Mm-hmm. It's going to have the will of the Father is declared in heaven. And so we're hoping that it sort of happens here. But as it happens here, it's with all kinds of resistance and hills to climb and speed bumps to hit. That none of that's hit in heaven. That's all done with there. And so it's degrees of difficulty and also degrees of, my theory is if they are reflecting their community, whether it's African American or Filipino or Hispanic or who they're trying to reach, if they're reflecting their community, I'm proud of that. And that's what I'm looking. If they're in a blended community and they're exclusively one thing, that pastor needs to defend that approach to me as district superintendent, why they're choosing to just hive off a slice of culture and just to do that target audience. I agree, Mike, with what you said, how hard it is for a person of color to be a lead pastor and to have that church bring in other cultures. It's just it's what it is. It's particularly difficult. It's a lot harder to do that. So I haven't figured that out. I've tried to read books. I haven't seen it. You know, the best thing is that you start a brand new church and you have a team approach. You have an African-American and a white person and Hispanic working together, because again, what you put on the platform tells your people and tells the community around you what kind of church you want to be. And also your worship style. That has a direct influence on the kind of culture that you're going to reach in your church. And if you're not careful, even a Black church that wants to be more integrating to maybe some of the white homes that live nearby, they often are going to have to move their cultural expressions more to a white side. And there's a part of me that feels that that's sad when that has to happen, but there's part of me says, yes, but you're trying to be more like Evan. So I go back and forth on this. It's a difficult thing to put on the local church in any cultural expression.
There is also, and I'll apologize before I do this. I'm going to say something. There's also a lashback. Charles County is now predominantly African American in demographic, and there is a pushback when a Black pastor would bring in a whiter worship style. There's a pushback from the Black community that is personal and painful that pastor must endure. And it's the vitriol is huge. And where if I try as a white pastor to move toward a more Black style of worship, I actually get lauded for that. If the Black pastor tries to move to a more white or Hispanic or whatever it may be form of worship, he is very much derided for that. And so that's part of what I mean when I say the external culture is moving into the internals of the church now, in the sense that the culture the treatment of pastors that are trying to be multicultural is entirely unfair and illogical, quite frankly. We want a diverse society in every sense. And yet we fight people who try to diversify certain sections of our society. And I think that makes it increasingly difficult. So, sorry.
Oh, apologize. Thank you for that. As a person that was born in Venezuela, that is a painful thing too. And I was explaining something that in Spanish, we think when you have to like make the sound that you're thinking, you go, in English, you go, just because, my own experience, just because I do instead of I've lost some of my Latinhood, some of my Venezuelanness because, I think of instead of And it's not that I'm doing it to just be better than, it's just, I'm so used to speaking English all the time that it just comes through. So just navigating even those waters, first generation, second generation, and like you said, the language barrier or the language there to reach other cultures when there is a first generation or second, it's just harder in terms of like, for me, for layers. But yes, thank you so much for sharing. Just to end up with this call, I want you to share one or the other. I want you to share some encouraging words for the pastors or leaders that are trying to, do the Wesleyan Church of Cities in Heaven in their churches or communities, or just share some, if I want to start doing this in my church, where do I begin? Encouraging word, or where do I begin?
Well, I'm just thankful that we're having this conversation on behalf of our tribe, our denomination, and that it's becoming more a part of the ideal and what we hope to see take place throughout our wherever we're represented throughout our districts. And I want to encourage all of the leaders to know that in the way I've looked at this through the years, that when I hear Jesus praying that your will be done on earth as it is in heaven, that I've tried to help my churches realized that they're bringing about an answer to what was close to the heart of Jesus Christ. You know, when you want to know what's important to people, listen to their prayers, because they pray from what's deep inside, and what's deep inside comes out as they're before the Father, and what they long for begins to come out. And so I think it's interesting that when Jesus decided to teach us how to pray, that part of that was taking the representation of the children of God before the throne in heaven, and saying, Lord, let it be done on earth as it is in heaven. And so when I encourage pastors in this regard, it is, I help them understand that it will be a difficult journey, and it will be a frustrating journey, and it will cost you in so many ways. And there will be close friends that will walk away in the process of that. But what God will bring into your life will be, and into your church, and the journey of understanding, the things that you will learn in this process will by far outweigh all the costs. All those things are real. But what God brings into your life as a result of this, the gratitude of seeing that you have opened a door for someone for whom that door was closed before, just the sense of satisfaction of knowing that you were able to embrace someone that years ago would have been cast aside. There's so many ways in which you can see the beauty and the blessing that comes through engaging in this journey. And I just want to encourage you to continue to do whatever it takes to push back. This is the encroaching darkness, and we see it more and more in our world instead of less and less. And so every time you push back on that, there's going to be a force pushing against you. And yet we know that this is part of God's call for the church. I believe it with all my heart. I believe that it's close to God's heart. And I just believe that what we're doing is what the many people for centuries has said is impossible. And for that reason, people have felt the call, they felt the urge to do this, and then pushed up against the controversy of it and walked away. But when you engage in what the rest of the world says is impossible, I think that's when you're able to see God do amazing things. So I just want to encourage you in that regard to just continue to follow your heart and to be that advocate, to engage in this journey, and to follow where he leads you. I think it's a fascinating and amazing journey.
Amen. Thank you so much, Pastor Karl. Pastor Mike.
Well, for me, I think maybe just the only thought that I'll leave is to remove all of the barriers to be a welcoming, wonderful, Christ-honoring congregation, pastor, board, people that sit in the pew. Sometimes we have to teach each other. Sometimes we have to point out where that didn't work. That's a good example of something we might not want to do next time. Or even little things like your pictures and paintings that are on the walls of your church. Walk around. Are they all white people? Are they all Hispanic? Are they all Black people? Just even the pictures on the walls of our churches can be unwelcoming to someone of a different background than us. And so whoever God brings in our doors, whether he brings people of different culture or not, whoever he does, my larger issue for me anyway, the churches I pastored, was that are we open-armed or do we sit and stare and think, oh no, what are they doing here? So it's just the posture of our welcoming spirit, from the parking lot greeters all the way into the platform and how that looks, and the pictures on the wall, to say this is a welcoming environment and you're welcome to be a part of the body of Christ here at this church.
If you'll if you'll allow me, I do this a lot. I'll oversimplify the case, and then you guys can tear it apart later. If our churches fail to be diverse, it's a cultural problem, and it's either a problem with the culture of the community, or it's a problem with the culture of the church. I say that in this sense. Where we live, everything you do is diversified. If you go to the grocery store, it's a diversified experience. If you go to work, it's a diversified experience. If you go to the gym, it's a diversified experience. If you go to daycare, it's a diversified experience. You take your kids to school, it's a diversified. Everything is a diversified experience. So our culture is diversified. So our problem is not in our community's culture, because that is diversified. If the church then in this culture is not diversified, it's a problem of the culture inside the church, which means that for some reason, you're not comfortable inviting your non-white friends or your non-whatever friends to your church. Answer the question, why? If you can get to the why of why you have a friend at work who's not like you and you're not willing to bring them to your church, why? Answer the question why, and you'll get to the what needs to be fixed. And it's really not as complicated as it would seem. This is why we are moving almost wholesale toward diversification of the dinner table, because that's going to answer your whys and give us our what. What is it about the church that won't let you bring your friend who is different from you to the church? Is it because the church is really only built for people like you? Or is it because the church is old fashioned? Or is it because what are those answers? If you can answer the why, you'll know what to fix. Now, if the problem is in the culture of the community, then you have to understand that if you're not in a diverse community, you're not going to have a diverse church. It is a misnomer as a denomination that spreads across an entire continent. It is a misnomer for us to believe that every Wesleyan church will be diverse. They just won't. I have neighborhoods here. If I have a neighborhood church in a certain section of Waldorf, there won't be a single white person in the church because there's no white people that live there. Karl has communities in the middle of New York State where there's only 12 people in the whole community. So if you got 6 of them, you're doing great, And so the truth is you've got to understand what the community is like. If there's no diversity in the community, you can't get diversity in the church. That's almost never true anymore. But if you do have that, then there's your problem. The problem's either going to be in the culture of the community or in the culture of the church. And figure out where the problem is, and then start asking the question of why. Because I got to be honest, in American culture, everything else is diversified. Everything except our dinner table and our churches is diversified. If we're not willing to diversify those two, ask why, and then figure out what needs to be fixed. So there's my part of it. And in the best way I can do it, Josmar, muchas gracias por trabajo todo aquí. Bendigas.
Amen. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. This is the end of our first series of this cohort. I hope that you enjoy the conversations. Thank you so much for all the insights and all your words and everything that you share with us. I really appreciate you. I keep learning. Every week is awesome how I keep learning. So thank you so much. Before you leave, thank you all the participants that were here for joining us, even if it was 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. We have new people that keep coming each week. So thank you so much. We have a survey. I keep telling you this because we definitely want to hear from you. We want to hear if you liked it, if you will come back another time, or you share with your friends. So we have that survey. I will send it to your email. Please it should take about 3 to 4 minutes to just respond. It's anonymous. So if you don't like it, it's not like I'm going to come back to you and say, hey, why not? Because it's not, you're not going to be, I don't know who's saying what. Okay. So that's what. And then next week on the 9th, we have Dr. D. Stokes and Zach Coffin from the Next Gen ministries that they're going to share about the cultural values from their experiences. So we're going to dig deeper in the learning tool that we had last week. I really highly recommend that you come and you share and you hear from them or just ask your questions. And so thank you so much. I want to just do a quick prayer, but I want to leave you with Romans 14:19, and I'm reading it from the NIV. It says, let us therefore make every effort to do what leads to peace and to mutual edification. So, dear Jesus, thank you for another cohort. Thank you for another time. Thank you for the participants and the panelists that were here. Thank you because you have brought us here to the Wesleyan Church, to our communities, to our zip codes. And thank you for the leadership that these pastors have. Bless their families, bless their ministries, bless their churches, their districts, and all the work that they're doing, Father. We put everything that we do in your hands just to give you the glory. In your name we ask and pray. Amen. So thank you so much. Bye-bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.